DJ PK, and we're joined now by Riley Jensen, the former Utah State quarterback. Riley, good morning.
What's happening, fellas?
Talking football, preseason, the expectations so high, so much positivity. You want to put your shoulder to that positivity and keep pushing that positivity, or you want to temper some expectations with everything you've been hearing through camp?
Every year at this time of year, like everybody's undefeated, everybody's excited, everybody's, everything's going to be great. BYU's receivers are incredible. University of Utah receivers are incredible. We hear this every year, and every year there is some things that let us down. I mean, we've had some good years recently, but man, I think there's pause for a lot of things. I'm worried about the offensive line at the University of Utah. I'm worried about the receivers at BYU. I'm worried about a quarterback at Utah State who's very athletic, but maybe can't make it through a season, or hasn't shown us that he can make it through a season yet. So, yeah, there's things that we need to temper our expectations with. I think there's no question about that.
If you're Kevin McGiven coming in from Utah State to Utah, and we've been hearing about some stuff, he's going to put his imprint on it. If I'm a fan of the Utes, I want his imprint to be much like Jason Beck's imprint, because that offense was explosive last year. Why would you try to change things up when what you have worked at a very high level?
Well, I think it's impossible. Look, you and I have talked about this on air and off air, PK. I think the most important thing for Jason McGiven or with Kevin McGiven is to be authentic to who he is. Look, the offense at Utah State last year was very similar to what the University of Utah ran. I mean, the pick farmer was running all over the field. He was making good throws. He wasn't making, every throw in the book. But I thought the offense was very similar, at a Utah State level to the University of Utah. So yeah, I think his impressions is going to be on the offense, because he's going to be authentic to himself, not necessarily because he's trying to be Jason Beck. Here's what I worry about at the University of Utah. Everybody's talking about the wide receivers and how great that is. And I heard you guys talking to my nemesis. I don't like to say his name. Hello, Frank. But
nice.
He
that's Frank Dolce.
He was talking about how, throwing down the field is not Dan Pierce's biggest thing, but I think one thing that I'm worried about with the University of Utah is not can they replace receivers, not can they do the things that they're going to want these receivers to do, but I felt like J.J. Buchanan last year really worked himself into a position where he could be a really, really big-time player for the Utes that made key clutch plays. He wasn't a burner. He was almost like a tight end wide receiver, Shannon Sharp type receiver who was so good. And I think back to, my best year ever playing college football was at Snow College my sophomore year. It was the only thing in my life where I wasn't just bang average at something. And I had Kevin Curtis, who played in the league for 10 years. He could get over the top of defenses, but I had two guys. I had a guy who was my tight end named James Tamalpeo, who ended up at the University of Utah, and my wide receiver named Lance Mickelson, who was one of the best possession receivers I'd ever been around. He ended up being the leading receiver for Tim Couch at Kentucky. And those type of receivers are so important to keep the chains moving. So what I'm looking forward to Kevin McGiven being able to find this fall is that receiver that can replace J.J. Buchanan as someone that can move the chains for you when you need to keep moving the ball down the field.
Do you believe that when you hear the offensive line is 10 deep, that they'll get the production they got last year? And is that enough? Because the two games they lost, they didn't run the ball very well. They didn't score very many points. They didn't run it at all against Texas Tech, and they ran a little bit against BYU, but they couldn't run it in the handful of short yardage situations that decided the game.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear that you're 10 deep. And look, I love Jordan Gross. I think he was an amazing athlete. I think he was an incredible professional and collegiate player. Um, if it's just his eyes that are telling him that, then maybe I don't trust it as much as if there's some other guys that are telling him the same thing. Like, look, you're 10 deep here. This is a really, really good offensive line. So depending on who's telling me that they're 10 deep, makes me feel good about that situation. They're not going to be as good 5 deep because they lost 2 first rounders, right? Like, I mean, we can pretend all we want like that's going to be, just a money position for them, but you don't replace 2 first rounders um, very easily.
No, you do not. We'll see how they do. Bear Bachmeier played at such a high level last year, and the thought being, well, he was a first-year freshman. Now he's a sophomore. He's been in the program, blah, 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 blah. But in terms of, that's a nice theory, but in terms of actuality, what level of improvement will we really see because he was so good last year?
Well, I think when you had a year that Bear had, I mean, there's obviously things to work on. We've talked on this show about like reading the moving parts over the middle of the field, but I think the overall thing that you need to work on if you really want to be an all-time BYU grade, if you want to be someone that gets to go to the NFL and have a career, is you need to work on the consistency that you need on an every game basis that makes you elite. And so to be elite, he's got to be more consistent. And what that means is if he throws for 350 against, Bo Diddley Tech, for a better reference than I can find, he's also got to be able to do that against Texas Tech.
Now, do all that, but just put in the name L.J. Martin. He ran for 1,300 yards. Can they count on that again? That's a massive total. He was 6th in the country last year. Do you expect the same kind of production, or is that too big an ask?
I do. I listen. I think L.J. Martin is one of the least talked about really good football players in the country, and it's so weird to me because we talk even here in this market, we talk a ton about Bear Bachmeier. I mean, the MVP of the league was L.J. Martin, the MVP, like top 5 player in the country, in my opinion. So, yeah, I think he's going to have a huge year. He needs to stay healthy. That's always true with a running back, right? But if he stays healthy, there's no reason for me to believe that he can't replicate exactly what he did last year.
Yeah, I think the reason why we don't talk about him enough, and I agree with you, is he draws no attention to himself. He's old school. Big run, touchdown run, put the ball down, hand it to the referee, whatever it might be. There's like Jamal Williams was a charismatic guy. Right, and still is. I mean, I assume he's done playing. I know he's been around the program, but he was a great interview. He'd laugh. The way he carried himself. L.J. Martin is so understated that you don't even realize he gained 1,300 yards last year because nothing about him brings attention to himself. And I think that's part of the reason. And in the end, as far as his NFL career and his college career, that's not going to matter because it's going to be about the production. But these people who are more flamboyant seem to get more attention. And that's pretty much, in my mind, the only reason why he's not getting it.
Well, I think that's very true. It's really refreshing to me. It reminds me a little bit of Tyler Algier in the sense that all Tyler Algier has done since he played at BYU is produce, both in the NFL and everywhere he goes. And everywhere he goes, he starts to produce, and then they draft another back. Then he gets traded to the Arizona Cardinals, and they're like, hey, we're going to make you the guy, and then they draft another back. I mean, there is something about having a little bit of flamboyance in some of these skill positions that gets you a little bit more attention. But, man, you can't argue with the production. And L.J. Martin is a man-child. He is a load. He is difficult to stop. And when he is rolling, BYU is very, very tough to stop.
BYU Notre Dame tickets are more expensive than BYU Miami tickets. What's the most you'd pay to go to a game? $100, $200, $300, $400, $500? Those BYU tickets are a little over $500.
I mean, when you start thinking about that, right? Like, I actually reposted this video by Hugh Freeze the other day. That was like, some family of 5 parked 5 miles away to sit in the top of this stadium to watch your tail play football. He goes, you owe them something, right? Like, and I, when you think about it, and I got all fired up, and it was like I'm 52 years old, and I shouldn't be fired up about football season because this edit that I retweeted was awesome. But you think about it, if I want to take my family to a BYU game at BYU versus Notre Dame, I mean the ticket prices are enormous. Like, I don't know how much I'm willing to spend. I think if I wanted to take my whole family, I think you're talking about like $400 is like where I kind of draw a line. I'm like, hey man, I can watch it on TV and I can see the grass in his face mask and I can get the statistics from the announcers and I can feel the power of the game on TV now. But I mean, for me, I think it's about max 400 because if you take that, that's $2,000. Not to mention how much a cougar tail costs me now, right? Yeah. And then if I want to have Cosmo come and visit me, it's another what, $1,600?
Right.
I don't know. It feels like a lot, but look, we're not talking about college football anymore. We got to get used to this. We're talking about pro football. These are pro football prices. These are pro football wages, and these players are getting paid like pro football players now. It's going to cost more to go to a game.
Jay Hill needed a year or so to get Weber going. How much do you think Care needs?
I think he needs a year. I think whenever you're a coach on a, and he's not mid-major, but he's with a really, really good conference in the FCS level. I think the hardest thing to bring in is your meat and potatoes to those schools. And meat and potatoes means offensive, defensive linemen, and maybe even tight ends, like where you find like real significant contributors in that spot. But I do think that Eric Kerr is going to have a year this year where there's a few games that he puts 50 points up on the board and you're like, oh my gosh, this could be a really, really fun team. And then there's going to be a couple of games where they lay eggs. I just don't think that they have all of the pieces together yet on the offensive and defensive line. I think he would probably tell you that. But this is going to be an exciting team all year to watch. And I think you're going to see his fingerprint very, very quickly, his fingerprints all over this program. And it's going to be fun. And there's some really, really good local players playing for Weber State.
Can he find those players you talk about in the state of Utah, or does he have to cast a wider net? Or are there enough really good Big Sky offensive linemen he'll be fine?
Well, I think there used to be, but I think what happens now is University of Utah, and I was looking at something the other day that said the average NIL payment for a P4 offensive lineman is around $200,000. Weber doesn't have $200,000. All they can compete with is playtime and a scholarship, right? And so I think it's a little bit different than it was even 5 years ago trying to fill in some of those pieces, because if you're an offensive lineman from the state of Utah and they can pay him $100,000 to cut, I mean, they hardly have to pay him anything to get to outrank Weber, if that makes sense.
Right.
Unless they're a real competitor and they really want to play. And so I think it's a little bit harder for an FCS school to get good offensive linemen that you aren't developing over a few years, right? So I think where Eric can make some hay is with the pre-missionary, signing a pre-missionary that weighs 260 pounds, is 6'5", 260 pounds. His dad weighs 350, and you're like, okay, this guy has the frame. We can develop him over the next couple years that he's at Weber and on a mission. And then he probably gets developed and taken away by one of the big P4 schools, but at least you have a really good offensive lineman for 2 years in your program. And then if you help him land, then you can sell that same type of story to another offensive lineman in the future.
If the dad weighs 350, how about if the mom weighs 240?
I plead the fifth. I pull a Fauci. I'm pulling a Fauci right now.
Well, I'm wondering if Utah State should adopt that model too, to an extent. We've talked several times with Todd Phillips, the UVU basketball coach, and he openly says, come here, man. Don't go someplace where you sit on a bench and don't get enough FGAs and don't get enough minutes. Come here, show the world what you can do, and then you can go on to the ACC. You can go on to the Big Ten, because he's done all of that. You can go on to the Big 12. Those guys that he's coached, they've all done that. He has a track record. He literally can point to guys and say, hey, you could be the next fill in the blank who comes here, plays well, they win a bunch of games, you go on, you increase your money. So certainly Weber can do that, but Utah State, obviously, with the receiver going from Logan down to Utah here this year, where he has an opportunity to be the leading receiver. I'm wondering if that's a strategy that a lot of these places should employ.
Well, I think in some ways, if you're a mid-major, you're an FCS school, you really are kind of imploring the JC model that used to be when I was playing, right? It's like, hey, go start for 2 years, have an incredible season at Snow College, and then sign a Division I scholarship. I mean, look, I think I've talked to you guys offline. Like, if your son is in the state of Utah, let's say he's top 2 quarterback in the state right now, which the quarterbacks in the state of Utah are getting offers, and they're playing good football. And let's say he's the second best quarterback in the state of Utah, but he is the 78th rated quarterback in the country. It turns into a really interesting picture, and here's why. The top 50 teams in the state are going to sign, or the top 50 teams in the country are going to sign the top 50 quarterbacks in the country. However, the next 50 teams in the country are going to take bounce backs from the top 50 teams in the country and use that scholarship for that player. So you could be ranked 78th in the country, which in the past was like, you're a Division I quarterback, like you're playing Division I. Now you may have to be patient enough and smart enough to say, hey, I'm going to go to Weber State for 2 years. I'm going to start for 2 years under Eric Kerr. I'm going to throw for a bajillion yards, and then I'm going to sign my big contract at a big time P4 school. And so it's a little tougher on a high school kid, because everybody likes the stickers on a helmet. But Eric could turn Weber State into a quarterback factory, just like he did at Corner Canyon, that churns out Division I quarterbacks and makes it so that Division I quarterbacks can come out of his program every 1 to 2 years, because they're in a great system for quarterbacks. And now you play 2 years at Weber State, you have a really good chance to go play somewhere.
Yeah.
Not to mention that you had a really good scholarship. You were the big man on campus. You cut your teeth on a little bit lower level football, and now you're ready to play big time football.
I like it.
How about, as Riley just greets the neighborhood as they head off to work in the morning? Good work, Riley. How about the argument that for a lot, it's very rare to move from high school to college, and then right away what you did as a high school coach doesn't matter. It doesn't. Except, and this is a major exception for Eric Kerr, when he goes out and recruits a quarterback, well, he's not getting the top 25 or 30 because of the money they're getting and their talent. But can he overachieve because he can say, why would you go there? Has anyone on that staff ever put anybody in the NFL? Because I got multiple quarterbacks on NFL rosters. This guy was drafted number 1. That guy starts for the New York Giants. I mean, he's got a story to tell. Why? You can go wherever you want, but if you come here, I'll teach you how to play in the NFL. And other people may tell you that, but take a deep breath before you buy what they're selling. And think about where my quarterbacks have gone, and then look at where their quarterbacks have gone. Seems like that's the one thing that you wouldn't normally have making a jump from high school to college, but he has that to sell.
Well, I think Eric has that. He has that story to sell. I mean, he has a very compelling story. He has that story to sell to some wide receivers too that go play in the SEC, that have gone on to play some big time football. Look, this is a guy who knows offense. Eric also knows defense really well. I mean, this is a very, very talented individual. If there's, we just don't see this happen very often. We hear about it going to happen. We hear that maybe it could happen here or there. I mean, there's a couple of different coaches. I'm trying to remember. There was a kid named Mitch Mustang out of Arkansas who I think his coach ended up being his offensive coordinator. Auburn later.
Malzahn?
I can't remember the exact story. Yeah. And so you had Mitch Mustang, who was this big time quarterback, and did you say Mazzoni?
Malzahn.
Yeah, Malzahn. Sorry. Malzahn ends up going up and he ends up being his offensive coordinator, I think, at Auburn later. Now, Mitch Mustang didn't end up being the quarterback, but he got that break, and then he ended up being a great coach on the next level. But we just don't see this happen very much. I think this was a very gutsy call by the athletic director at Weber State. And I think there's going to be really interesting dividends at Weber State because of this.